From November 29th to December 2nd, I attended the Online Educa conference in Berlin. Online Educa is a technology conference with a focus on e-learning. It covers the education, government, and corporate sectors. I'm putting this video together as another example of how we can share our learnings at HKIS from attending conferences back to the school community. This conference is interesting in that it brings together a wide variety of different groups, so it provides a window into learning outside of K-12 with technology, particularly outside of K-12 international schools. Two things stood out for me as trends in education technology in the higher ed and corporate sectors. The first is that games-based learning, and the second is experiential learning via simulations and virtual worlds. In both of these cases, rather than the traditional print or even digital text materials coordinated by instructors, there are companies and schools developing the expertise to build digital simulations that enable students to do what they are learning and get instant feedback on performance. For instance, a courtroom for a law student or a hospital for a nurse. For now, the adoption of these types of simulations is constrained by their high costs, which limits their use to higher education and corporate sectors. However, in time, the cost to produce these will come down, making it feasible for their use at the K-12 level. Aside from this, what were the big picture trends and ideas? Well, one is that human beings over time are getting smarter. This is the so-called Flynn effect, which is reasonably well known. Not that Flynn, this one. This Flynn is a scientist from New Zealand actually, and he postulates that the general intelligence as measured by IQ has increased over time and is continuing to do so. There are various reasons posited for why this might be the case. But one of those, this keynote speaker posited, was that it was due to technological effects on how we use our brain. How so? It has to do with what is referred to in neuroscience as transactive memory. Transactive memory is when you offload some memory function out of your brain. Today, this is something we certainly do with computers, as we can all attest to. However, it's true even without computers. If you think about a relationship, for instance, between a husband and a wife, partners tend to take on specific memory functions. For instance, the wife might, when traveling, keep flight numbers, times, whilst the husband might remember what bills need paying and when. We do this as it helps us keep the number of things we need to worry about individually in our head down to a minimum, but as a unit we function well together. If you need to find out when a flight leaves or how much the rent is, you consult your partner. In a large sense, this is what we are now doing all the time with technology in the age of Google. It's been empirically proven. In a Columbia experiment, scientists recorded brain patterns whilst asking students to memorize facts in a variety of domains. When asked facts, the students immediately thought about Google. This was measured in their brainwaves. In other words, if the students believed that later they could easily look up the information they were being asked, their brains tended not to remember the facts, but rather remember how they might access the facts later. A psychologist at Washington University told Science in reference to the study, "Why remember something if I know I can look it up again?" In some sense, with Google and other search engines, we can offload some of our memory demands onto machines. Our transactive memory now has instant access to so much more info than it ever did before, far beyond what our family and colleagues might be able to access. In this way, our brains are left for cognitive processing rather than data retention. In that way, is it more important that we're able to effectively access our transactive memory than actually remember factual information? What impacts might that have on education? In the age of digitization, our transactive memory is huge, potentially huge. Google has scanned all the books, and you can get a picture of this with the Engram experiment, a website which reveals the frequency of certain words in all books over time. Amazing. More practically, what does this mean? Well, it means that the world's classrooms are going digital. One thing that I learned at this conference is that in South Korea, all classrooms will be going paperless by 2015. There is a push at the governmental level for all citizens in Europe to have an electronic portfolio. These are seen as national or regional priorities in an increasingly globalized world. Where does that leave us, international schools? We are simultaneously blessed, but perhaps also hurt by not being captured to legislative and regulatory obligations. The answer is certainly not inaction. We can see where technology for learning in our sector is going by looking at what has been adopted in the corporate and higher education sectors. All of these technologies will trickle down. The impetus at the governmental level is towards increased engagement with digital learning. Why? Because it is physically altering the way we remember and access information, the way we think. We, in international schools, need to be continuously engaged in this conversation, trying to answer these questions, what it means for us.